14 emergency physicians, 6 trauma nurses, 1 mass casualty drill, and every single one of them froze on step 9. It wasn't the equipment. Vail Health Network had spent $2.1 million upgrading the simulation lab the previous spring. It wasn't the training day logistics. The drill coordinator had run 47 of these in the past 4 years. The problem was specific, locatable, and entirely preventable. Nobody in the room had been taught what Step 9 actually required, because the man who designed Step 9, who had built the entire Scenario 7 mass casualty protocol from scratch across 3 weeks in 2016, had been cleaning hospital corridors 4 floors below them when the drill began. He had been cleaning corridors for 11 months. His name was Eli Marsh. He was 42 years old, a single father, and his badge said custodial services in the same font as every other badge in the building. He had a son named Theo, who was 9, who collected transit maps from every city they had ever lived in and kept them in a binder organized by year, and who had asked Eli on the morning before the drill whether the hospital where his dad worked ever practiced for big emergencies. Eli had said yes. The laminated card in his breast pocket, white cardstock, black text, Scenario 7 Mass Casualty Protocol printed at the top, EM, written in his own hand at the bottom right, was in every ER physician's pocket in that building, had been for 7 years. Nobody had thought to ask who EM was. Stay with this, because the man mopping the 4th floor when the drill collapsed was the reason the drill existed in the first place, and what happened when Cassandra Vail finally understood that is the story. Eli Marsh lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on Reading Road in Cincinnati's Avondale neighborhood, in a building that had been a residential hotel in the 1940s and had been converted with the specific economy of a project that ran out of ambition halfway through. The ceilings were high, the windows were tall and leaked in February. The radiator in the kitchen made a sound Theo had classified, in his exact words, as a train deciding whether to leave. Theo was 9 years old. He had Eli's patience and his own mother's precision, 2 qualities that in Theo expressed themselves as a child who never interrupted, took careful notes in a small pocket notebook he carried everywhere, and had been known to correct a teacher's math on the whiteboard with a politeness so complete that the teacher thanked him. He had light brown skin, close-cropped dark hair, dark eyes behind rectangular wire-rimmed glasses that he had chosen himself at the optometrist, and a gap between his 2 front teeth that appeared when he smiled at something he found genuinely surprising rather than merely amusing. He walked to school 3 blocks away. On days when Eli worked the early shift, he walked alone, which he had been doing since he was 8, which he had insisted upon at 7, which Eli had agreed to because Theo had presented his case in 3 points with a hand-drawn map of the route, including the safest street crossings. Eli had kept the map. It was on the kitchen wall next to the radiator. The laminated card had come with Eli from his previous position, the way certain things come with you when you leave a job, not because anyone handed it to you, but because you made it, and it was yours, and leaving it behind felt like leaving part of the work undone. He had laminated it himself at the UPS store on McMillan Avenue in the last week of his tenure as simulation director at Vail Health's flagship facility, Cincinnati General. He had made 12 copies, 1 for himself, 11 for the physician roster. He had distributed 11. He had kept 1. That was October 2016. By November, the protocol had been integrated into the hospital's standard emergency preparedness curriculum. By 2018, Vail Health had rolled it out to all 14 of its Ohio facilities. By 2020, when Eli was no longer affiliated with the hospital in any official capacity, Scenario 7 was cited in Vail Health's accreditation documentation as a key component of the network's emergency readiness framework. His name was not in the accreditation documentation. He had left in 2020, not immediately, not abruptly, but in the graduated way of departures that are organized to look mutual when only one party is being managed out. Cassandra Vail had taken over as CEO in 2019. At 34, the youngest person to hold that position in the network's history, she had arrived with a clear mandate: reduce operational overhead, modernize administrative structure, streamline what her initial presentation to the board had called legacy staffing patterns. The simulation directorate, which Eli had built into a 12-person department with a $4.3 million annual budget, had been restructured in 18 months into a 3-person team under the VP of Clinical Education. The director role had been reclassified. Eli had been offered the reclassified position at a salary that was $67,000 below what he had been making. He had declined. The departure had been documented as voluntary. He had taken the custodial position 11 months ago for 2 reasons. The first was that it was available, paid adequately, and was at Cincinnati General, which meant that Theo's specialist appointments at the hospital's pediatric cardiology unit, which happened every 10 weeks, and which Eli had structured his entire professional life around being available for, remained logistically manageable. The second reason was one he had not articulated to anyone. The hospital was still running his protocol, still training physicians on his curriculum, still citing his framework in its accreditation filings, and he wanted to be close enough to know when something went wrong. Something went wrong on a Thursday in March. The mass casualty drill had been scheduled for 10 a.m. Eli knew about it because the custodial shift briefing included facility event notifications, and because he read every line of those briefings with the attention of someone for whom facility event notifications had once been things he wrote rather than received. He was on the 4th floor at 10:15, running a supply cart past the east corridor near the simulation lab, when he heard the drill coordinator's voice over the internal communication system call a regroup, not a pause. Drills had scheduled pauses. A regroup, the specific cadence of a regroup announcement when you had run 47 drills yourself, meant the drill had encountered a problem that required stopping and reorienting before it could continue. He stopped the cart. He listened. The regroup announcement was followed by 4 minutes of silence, which was too long for a standard regroup. At the 4-minute mark, he heard the coordinator's voice again, and this time the tone was different. Still professional, still controlled, but with the specific flatness of someone who was improvising because the plan had failed. Participants, we're going to move directly to the debrief. The simulation exercise is concluded for today. Eli stood in the east corridor with his supply cart and thought about what he had just heard. He pushed the cart to the supply alcove, parked it, and went down to the lobby for his lunch break. In the lobby, the shift change was happening for the physician teams coming off the drill. He did not approach them. He found a seat near the coffee station, opened his lunch, and listened. The conversation he caught pieces of was between 2 residents who were still wearing their simulation vests and did not appear to have noticed or cared that a custodian was within earshot. Couldn't get past the secondary triage. Nobody could do the patient-to-resource ratio. I know. I kept looking for step 9 in the protocol card, and I was doing it wrong. What even is step 9? Like, who decided that was a thing? It's on the card. It's always been on the card. Nobody ever explained it. Eli set down his sandwich. He looked at the laminated card in his breast pocket. He looked at the 2 residents who were still talking, frustrated and slightly embarrassed in the way of people who had just failed publicly at something they should have known. Step 9 was not obvious. He had known that when he wrote it. It was the step that required a judgment call that no algorithmic protocol could fully encode. He had planned to create a supplemental training module for Step 9. In October 2020, when his departure had been finalized, the supplemental module had been 70% complete. He had not finished it. That afternoon, he called his brother, who was an attorney in Columbus and who had handled the documentation of Eli's departure from Vail Health. The drill collapsed on Scenario 7, he said. Step 9, his brother said. And I want to know if I still have standing to formally advise the clinical education team. A pause. As what? His brother said. As the person who designed the protocol, Eli said. His brother's name was David, and David Marsh had been a healthcare employment attorney for 16 years. He was somewhat surprised by the custodial position. Tell me what you're thinking, he said, on the phone that Thursday afternoon. Eli told him. He told him about the drill termination. He told him about the residents in the lobby. He told him about Step 9 and the supplemental module that had been 70% complete when he left. He told him that the protocol was still running under his framework, still being cited in accreditation documentation, and that the current clinical education team did not fully understand a critical component of the protocol they had inherited. Patient safety, David said. Patient safety, Eli said. David was quiet for a moment. You didn't say I want my job back, David said. I don't want my job back, Eli said. I want step 9 to work. Another silence. The supplemental module, David said. Where is it? Eli looked at the desk in his bedroom, where a laptop sat with a file called scenario 7 _ step 9 _ supplement _ draft _ v4. PTTX that he had opened twice in 11 months and not edited. 70%, he said. Finish it, David said. Then we talk about how to deliver it. Eli finished it over the following 2 weeks, working evenings after Theo was in bed, the same hours he had used to build the original protocol 8 years earlier. The supplemental module ran to 41 slides, included 6 scenario variations, 2 decision trees, and a set of facilitator notes that explained not just what Step 9 required, but why, the specific reasoning behind a decision framework that looked arbitrary until you understood the patient mortality data it was based on, at which point it looked inevitable. He sent it to David on a Sunday evening. David called the next morning. I've read it, he said. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer it directly. All right. Did Varo Health, at any point between 2016 and 2020, formally assign the intellectual property rights of the Scenario 7 protocol or any associated training materials to the network? Eli thought about this. There was a standard IP agreement in my employment contract, he said. Work product created in the scope of employment belongs to the employer. The supplemental module, David said. When did you start drafting it? October 2020, Eli said. Your last day was when? October 31st. And the module? I started it October 4th, Eli said. I didn't finish it before I left. So you have an unfinished document, started during employment but never completed or delivered, David said. And the finished version you've just sent me was completed in February of this year, Eli said. David said, on your own time, on your own equipment, 11 months after your employment ended. Yes, Eli said. A pause. Eli, David said, I think you may have a more interesting situation here than a patient safety referral. David spent a week reviewing the documentation. What he found was a paper trail that was extensive in some directions and conspicuously sparse in others. Extensive. The documentation of the protocol's adoption, deployment, and institutional integration. Scenario 7 was referenced in 11 separate Vial Health administrative documents between 2016 and 2023. It had been formally presented to the Ohio Hospital Association as a case study in emergency preparedness in 2019. It had been cited by the Joint Commission reviewer as a best practice example in Vail Health's most recent accreditation cycle. Sparse attribution. The protocol was referred to, consistently and across all 11 documents, as the VARS Health Mass Casualty Protocol, or Scenario 7. In none of the 11 documents, not one, did the name Eli Marsh appear. David called Eli on a Friday afternoon. I want you to walk me through the development process, he said. Start at the beginning. Eli walked him through it. He walked him through the 18 months of development that had preceded the October 2016 implementation, the literature review, the site visits to 4 peer institutions, the 3 rounds of physician feedback, the 7 protocol revisions, the final validation run that had taken place in September 2016 with 32 participants and had produced a revised mortality outcome model that the original protocol had not anticipated. He walked him through the 7 facilitated training sessions he had personally run in 2017. Why didn't you finish the supplemental module before you left? In 2020? Eli was quiet for a moment. It was a fair question, because finishing it felt like completing something for them, he said. And I was angry. And Theo was 4, and the departure had been hard, and I was managing too many things at once. A pause. And because I told myself someone else would finish it, someone on the new team, I assumed they would understand what Step 9 needed and would build out the training themselves. They didn't, David said. No, Eli said. They didn't. David said. Here's what I see. A protocol that's been running network-wide for 7 years, generating accreditation value, and being cited as a best practice example, with the person who designed it nowhere in the documentation. A supplemental training component that should have been delivered in 2017 or 2018 that was never developed because the only person who fully understood the protocol left in 2020, and a mass casualty drill that failed last week on the exact step the protocol's designer flagged as requiring additional training. Eli said nothing. That's not a patient safety issue, David said. I mean, it is a patient safety issue, but it's also something else. What he found, in the course of reviewing every document that had touched the Scenario 7 protocol between 2016 and the present, was not a single act of deliberate erasure. It was something more complicated, and in David's experience more common, an institutional process that had gradually detached the protocol from its author, the way a ship detaches from its moorings. Not through any single cut, but through a series of small drifts, each of which was easy to explain, and none of which, individually, appeared significant. The 2016 implementation documents had listed Eyal as lead developer. His name appeared on the original protocol document, on the training session records, and on the first version of the laminated card. In 2018, when Cassandra's predecessor had overseen the network-wide rollout, the rollout documentation had used a standardized Volley Health template that listed the protocol under Clinical Simulation Department rather than individual attribution. It was a template choice, not a deliberate decision. But it was also the moment when Eli's name stopped appearing. None of this, David noted carefully in his analysis, suggested that Cassandra Val had acted in bad faith. What it suggested was something more uncomfortable, that an institutional process had produced an outcome that was, in its cumulative effect, a systematic erasure of an individual's contribution without any single person having intended it. The question, David told Eli, is what you want to do about it. The supplemental module needs to be delivered, Eli said. Yes, David said. And Eli looked at the laminated card on his kitchen table. He had taken it out of his pocket when he got home and set it on the table, which he did some evenings, not to examine it, just to have it visible, in the way you keep something visible when it matters. I want my name on the protocol, he said, in the documentation, in the accreditation filings, in whatever format is appropriate and accurate. A pause. And I want the supplemental module delivered to the physician roster by someone who understands it, which means either I deliver it or I train whoever delivers it. That's two things, David said. Those are my two things, Eli said. David said, there's a third thing we should discuss. The module you finished in February, David said. The IP situation on that document is genuinely not clear-cut. The original protocol belongs to Vale Health, under your employment contract. That's settled. The supplemental module is more complicated. You started it during employment. You finished it after. The completion work, the 41 slides, the 6 scenarios, the decision trees, that was done on your time, on your equipment, after your employment ended. How complicated, Eli said. Complicated enough, David said, that they'll want to have a real conversation about it. When Cassandra Val arrived in 2019 and began the restructuring, she had inherited a protocol she believed had been developed by the department she was restructuring. There was no reason, from her perspective, to think otherwise. The documentation didn't tell her otherwise. She had restructured the department without knowing she was dismantling the team built by the person whose protocol was generating the network's accreditation value. She had offered Eli the reclassified position at a $67,000 salary reduction without knowing she was offering it to the protocol's author. She had accepted his voluntary departure without knowing she was losing the only person who understood the full design rationale for the framework she was continuing to deploy. The person who had known and said nothing was not Cassandra Val. David found him in the 2019 restructuring documents. A man named Victor Feld, 53, who had been Vale Health's VP of Clinical Education since 2017, and who had, during his tenure, overseen the network-wide implementation of Scenario 7, supervised the departmental restructuring that had effectively erased Eli's attribution from the protocol documentation and actively shaped the language of the 2021 accreditation filing. The 2021 accreditation filing was the one that cited Scenario 7 as a best practice example of institutional emergency preparedness development. It was the filing that had generated the most significant reputational value for Vale Health in the accreditation cycle. Victor Feld had written the narrative section of the 2021 filing. The narrative section described the development of Scenario 7 in terms that were accurate about the process and completely silent about the person. It described a multi-year collaborative development process involving clinical simulation specialists and emergency medicine faculty. It described iterative protocol testing with 32 physician participants. It described a decision framework grounded in mortality outcome modeling. Every one of these phrases was accurate. Every one of them could have been written by someone who had read the 2016 implementation documents and understood what had happened, or by someone who had been there. Victor Feld had been there. The person who had known and said nothing was not Cassandra Vale. David found him in the 2019 restructuring documents. A man named Victor Feld, 53, who had been Vale Health's VP of Clinical Education since 2017, and who had, during his tenure, overseen the network-wide implementation of Scenario 7, supervised the departmental restructuring that had effectively erased Eli's attribution from the protocol documentation and actively shaped the language of the 2021 accreditation filing. The 2021 accreditation filing was the one that cited Scenario 7 as a best practice example of institutional emergency preparedness development. It was the filing that had generated the most significant reputational value for Vale Health in the accreditation cycle. Victor Feld had written the narrative section of the 2021 filing. The narrative section described the development of Scenario 7 in terms that were accurate about the process and completely silent about the person. It described a multi-year collaborative development process involving clinical simulation specialists and emergency medicine faculty. It described iterative protocol testing with 32 physician participants. It described a decision framework grounded in mortality outcome modeling. Every one of these phrases was accurate. Every one of them could have been written by someone who had read the 2016 implementation documents and understood what had happened, or by someone who had been there. Victor Feld had been there. Victor Feld had been there. He had attended the September 2016 validation run. His name was on the participant list. He had been in the room when Eli had presented the mortality outcome model that had led to the final protocol revision. He had shaken Eli's hand afterward and said, in words that Eli could still recall precisely, "This is the best thing this department has built in 20 years. He had then spent the following 4 years writing about a multi-year collaborative development process without mentioning who had led it. David presented this to Eli on a Tuesday evening, at the kitchen table, in person, not over the phone, because what he had found warranted a conversation with no distance in it. Eli read the accreditation filing narrative. He read it twice. He read the 2021 Joint Commission notes. He set them down. He knew, Eli said. He was there, David said. He knew, and he wrote it that way anyway. He wrote it in a way that wasn't false, David said carefully. Everything he wrote was technically accurate. Accurate and true are not the same thing, Eli said. David slid another document across the table. It was an internal memo from November 2019, authored by Victor Feld, addressed to Cassandra Vale, recommending the restructuring of the simulation directorate into the VP of Clinical Education's oversight. The memo described the simulation function as a mature operational program well-positioned for integration into existing clinical education infrastructure. A mature operational program, not a developing directorate, with a director who had built it from nothing. Not a specialized function that required specialized leadership. A mature operational program, well-positioned for integration, which was the language you used when you wanted to absorb something without acknowledging what you were absorbing. Eli looked at the memo. He thought about the reclassified position offer, $67,000 below his existing salary, in a role that reported to Victor Feld. He thought about what it would have been like to accept that offer, to work for the man who had written this memo, to continue developing training for a protocol whose attribution had been systematically removed from the documentation by the same person who was now his supervisor. He had declined the offer on a Thursday morning. He had been very calm about it. Does Cassandra Vale know about any of this? David considered this carefully. I don't believe she does, he said. She inherited a protocol, inherited a restructuring recommendation, and acted on both without knowing their full history. So she made decisions based on incomplete information, Eli said. Yes, provided by someone who had complete information. That's my assessment, David said. Eli was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the laminated card, still on the table where he had left it. He looked at the memo. What I want, Eli said, is the same 2 things I told you before. The supplemental module delivered to every physician in the network who carries a Scenario 7 card, and my name on the protocol in the documentation. What I do not want is for Cassandra Vale to be misled about what happened, by me or by anyone else, in the same way she was misled the first time. If we have a conversation with her, she gets the full picture. David looked at him. Including the memo, Eli said. Including the memo, David confirmed. David requested a meeting with Cassandra Vale's office on a Wednesday. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. The meeting was at Vile Health's administrative offices in the Kenwood neighborhood, in a conference room on the 7th floor, with windows facing east. Present were Cassandra Vile, Vile Health's general counsel Patricia Park, and Victor Feld. Victor Feld's presence had not been listed in the meeting confirmation. David had seen him when they entered the room and made a specific decision not to react. Eli made the same decision. Cassandra Vile was 39 now, 5 years into the CEO role, and she carried it the way people carry positions they have grown into rather than positions they were always suited for. She had the focused attention of someone who processed information quickly, and the specific stillness of someone who had learned that stillness was more powerful than motion. She looked at Eli when he sat down, and he understood, from the way she looked, that she had read some briefing materials before this meeting. David placed 3 documents on the table. The first was Eli's 2016 employment record, showing his title as Director of Clinical Simulation. The second was the original Scenario 7 protocol document, the one with Eli's name on it, from October 2016, before the language had changed. The third was the 2021 accreditation filing narrative, with Victor Feld's name as author. Cassandra read all 3. She was a fast reader. She read the third document twice. The protocol document, she said. This has Mr. Marsh's name on it. Yes, David said. Our current documentation doesn't. No, David said. It doesn't. She looked at the third document again. Then she looked at Victor Feld. Victor Feld said, "The standardized template." Victor, Cassandra said. She said it quietly and completely. She did not raise her voice. She simply said his name, and he stopped. She looked at Eli. "Walk me through the development," she said. Eli walked her through it. The same account he had given David 6 weeks earlier on the phone. He gave it in the same sequence, with the same precision, without embellishment or grievance, because the facts were sufficient and embellishment would have reduced them. "The supplemental module," she said. "The Step 9 training, you've completed it." "Yes," Eli said. "Since leaving the network." "Since leaving the network," he said. She looked at David. "The IP question," she said, "is genuinely complicated," David said. "We're not here to litigate it. We're here because Mr. Marsh's primary interest is patient safety, specifically, ensuring that Scenario 7 is fully operational, which it currently isn't. The drill failure last Thursday established that." Cassandra turned back to Eli. "What do you need?" she said. It was, Eli thought, the right question. Not what do you want, what do you need? He had been the person who figured out what people needed when the situation was unclear and the stakes were high, and someone was asking him that question now, which meant she understood the framing. 2 things, he said. The supplemental module, delivered to every physician in the network who carries a Scenario 7 card, and attribution. My name on the protocol in the official documentation, including the accreditation record. And the module itself, she said. The IP. He looked at her. The module should belong to the network, he said. It's an extension of a protocol that belongs to the network. I want to be compensated fairly for completing it, and I want attribution, but I want it in clinical education hands where it can be used, not in mine where it can't be. Cassandra looked at him for a moment longer than the question required. Then she looked at Victor Feld. "Victor," she said, "I'd like you to wait outside." Victor Feld left. The door closed. She did not negotiate. She said, "That's reasonable." Then she said, "Would you be willing to return to a formal advisory role? Not a permanent position, a structured engagement, delivering the supplemental training to the physician roster, reviewing the protocol for any other gaps, and providing input on the next training cycle, a defined scope, a defined timeline." Eli said, "I work the 6 to 2 shift on custodial 5 days a week. I have a 9-year-old whose specialist appointments are in this building. Any advisory arrangement would need to be structured around those 2 facts." Cassandra said, "That can be accommodated." She said it without hesitation and without performance. which was the only way Eli would have believed it. The conversation with Victor Feld happened the following day, in Cassandra's office, with Patricia Park present, and without David. Victor was 53 years old, and had the bearing of someone who had spent a long time in institutional environments, and had developed the specific quality of knowing how to appear forthcoming while committing to nothing. He sat across from Cassandra's desk, with his hands on his knees in the posture of a man who had prepared a position. Cassandra had not given him time to deliver it. "I've reviewed everything David Marsh sent over," she said. "I've also reviewed the 2019 restructuring memo. I want to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer." Victor said he understood. "Did you know, when you wrote the 2021 accreditation filing, that Eli Marsh was the primary developer of Scenario 7? A pause that was half a second too long. "The protocol was a collaborative effort, Victor," Cassandra said. His name again, the same way, the same result. He looked at his hands. "Yes," he said. "I was aware of his role." "I'm going to be direct with you," Cassandra said. "I made decisions in 2019 and 2020 that I would not have made if I had been given accurate and complete information. The information I received was technically accurate and substantially incomplete. I want you to understand that I am aware of the distinction between those two things, and that I hold you responsible for the gap between them." She paused. "What I am going to tell you, right now and directly, is that the Scenario 7 protocol and the supplemental module are going to be attributed to Eli Marsh in every piece of Vial Health documentation that references them, and that attribution is permanent." Victor Feld left Cassandra's office without saying anything that Eli, who was in the corridor, and whose conversation this had not been, overheard. He had not planned to be in the corridor. He had been in the corridor because he had a supply cart to return from the previous shift, and the cart route ran past Cassandra's office. It was his building. He knew the routes. He had heard enough to know the shape of what had happened, and he had kept moving, because the cart needed to be returned, and his shift was not over, and he had learned, in 42 years of being the kind of person he was, that the most important things rarely required you to stop and watch them. They happened while you were doing the next thing. The supplemental module was delivered in April, over 3 Tuesday evenings, in the simulation lab on the 4th floor, the same floor where Eli had run his supply cart past the East Corridor on the day of the drill. He delivered it himself, to 3 cohorts of 12 physicians each. He did not wear the custodial uniform for the training session. He wore the same button-down shirt and khakis he had worn for physician training in 2017. Practical, professional, nothing that said anything except that the person wearing it had things to say. He had pressed the shirt the night before each session, which Theo had noticed and which Theo had asked about. "You're wearing the training shirt," Theo said, on the first Tuesday morning. "I am," Eli said. "For the hospital?" "For the hospital." Theo had looked at him with the expression he used when he was adding information to a category that was still being formed. "Are you a doctor?" he said. "No," Eli said. "I'm the person who taught the doctors." Theo wrote something in his notebook. Eli did not ask what. The training sessions went as they were supposed to go, which is the best thing that can be said about training sessions designed to prepare people for situations where going as they're supposed to go is the difference between an outcome and a catastrophe. The physicians in the first cohort included the 2 residents Eli had overheard in the lobby in March. He did not tell them he had heard them. He taught them Step 9. The second cohort included the attending who had been leading the drill when it terminated. She stayed 20 minutes after the session ended to ask questions about the decision tree. She said, "I've been carrying that card for 6 years. I thought I understood it." "Most people do," he said. "Step 9 is the part that only makes sense when someone explains the data behind it. Why wasn't it in the original documentation?" she said. He thought about how to answer this. "I ran out of time," he said. "It was my mistake." She looked at him. "It happens," she said. The attribution correction was filed with the Joint Commission in May. Every reference to the Vial Health Mass Casualty Protocol, or Scenario 7, in official documentation was amended to include primary development by Eli Marsh, Director of Clinical Simulation, 2014 to 2020. David called Eli when the filing was confirmed. "It's done," he said. "Thank you," Eli said. "You're not going to say anything else?" "What else is there to say?" Eli said. David laughed, a short, genuine sound. "I'll send the invoice," he said. The laminated card moved, not far, from Eli's breast pocket to the simulation lab's resource shelf on the 4th floor, where it sat in a clear acrylic holder with the updated version of the protocol beside it. The updated version had the same text, the same structure, the same Step 9. It had one addition at the bottom of the first page, developed by Eli Marsh, 2016. Supplemental training, Eli Marsh, 2024. Eli had kept the original card. It was in the breast pocket of the training shirt, which was hanging in his closet. It is a Tuesday morning in September, 5 months after the spring training cycle. Eli arrives at the hospital at 6 a.m. for his custodial shift. He badges in through the service entrance, picks up his cart from the depot, and starts the east corridor, on the 4th floor. The same corridor, the same cart, the same route he has been running for 22 months. The simulation lab is dark when he passes it. The training session for the fall cycle begins at 6 p.m., which is after his shift ends, which is how he preferred to schedule it so that Theo's afternoon routine is not disrupted. He mops the 4th floor corridor with the methodical attention that he has brought to it since he started, noting the grout line near the elevator bay that has been slowly separating since March, checking the seal on the storage room door, observing whether the overhead light near the simulation lab entrance has been replaced since he submitted the maintenance request last Thursday. It has not. He will submit a follow-up. At 8 a.m., Theo sends him a text from school. Today's text says, "Found a new transit map at the library book sale. Buffalo, NY 2018. Is Buffalo far?" Eli types back, "About 6 hours. We could go sometime." Then he considers and adds, "Add it to the binder. 3 dots. Then, already did." He smiles at his phone and puts it away and continues the corridor. At 10:15, he is on the supply run for the 2nd floor when he passes the main lobby. The 2 residents from the first spring cohort are there, waiting for the elevator, still in their white coats. One of them is showing the other something on a tablet, a diagram, from the angle of it, possibly a decision tree. He does not stop. He does not make himself known. He pushes the cart past the lobby toward the supply alcove, through the lobby window. Briefly, he can see the entrance to the hospital's east wing, where the pediatric cardiology unit is, where Theo's appointment is in 3 weeks. At 6 p.m., he will walk upstairs in his training shirt, and the 12 residents will be in the simulation lab, and he will begin the session on Scenario 7. He will tell them what the protocol does. He will tell them why it does it. He will tell them about Step 9, not as a rule to memorize, but as a decision to understand, with the reasoning behind it, and the data that produced it, and the specific conditions under which it applies, and the specific conditions under which it does not. He will do this because it is the work, and the work is what matters. And he has known that for longer than the hospital has been running the protocol he wrote. At 2 p.m. he badges out. He drives to Theo's school and parks in the pickup line with the other parents and waits. Theo comes out of the building with his backpack and his notebook, and the specific walk of a person who has been thinking about something since lunch and is ready to tell someone what it is. He gets in the car. He puts his seatbelt on. He opens the notebook. "Dad," he says. "Yes. I've been thinking about the transit map binder." "Okay. It's organized by year," Theo says. "But cities have multiple systems, and the systems change at different rates. So the year isn't really the right organizing principle." Eli looks at his son. "What would be the right organizing principle?" he says. Theo looks at the notebook. He has written something on the page, a diagram, possibly the corner of it visible at the top. "I'm not sure yet," he says. "I'm still working on it." Eli pulls out of the pickup line into the afternoon traffic. "Tell me when you figure it out," he says. "I will," Theo says. He writes something else in the notebook. Eli drives. Cincinnati in September has the specific quality of a city deciding to become itself again after a summer that tried to make it something else. The light at the right angle, the air with the right weight, the ordinary streets in the ordinary afternoon light that is enough.